Be grateful in spite of your suffering. Down can define up. I've been searching for decades for certainty. It has been solely a matter of thinking in the creative sense, but of thinking and attempting to undermine and destroy those thoughts, followed by careful consideration and conservation of those that survive. It is identification of a path forward through a swampy passage, searching for stones to stand on safely below the murky surface. However, even though I regard the inevitability of suffering and its exaggeration by malevolence as unshakable existential truths, I believe even more deeply that people have the ability to transcend their suffering psychologically and practically, and to constrain their own malevolence as well as the evils that characterize the social and the natural worlds. Human beings have the capacity to courageously confront their suffering, to transcend it psychologically, as well as to ameliorate it practically. This has the most fundamental twin axiom of psychotherapy, regardless of school of thought, as well as key to the mystery of human success and progress across history itself. If you confront the limitations of life courageously, that provides you with a certain psychological purpose that serves as an antidote to the suffering. The fact of your voluntary focus on the abyss, so to speak, indicates to yourself at the deepest of levels that you are capable of taking on without avoidance the difficulties of existence and the responsibility attendant upon that. That mere act of courage is deeply reassuring at the most fundamental levels of psychological being. It indicates your capability and competence to those deep, ancient, and somewhat independent biological and psychological alarm systems that register the danger of the world. But the utility of such confrontation is by no means merely psychological, as important as that is. It is the appropriate pragmatic approach, as well if you act nobly, a word that is very rarely used now. Unfortunately, in the face of suffering, you can work practically and effectively to ameliorate and rectify your own and other people's misery as such. You can make the material world, the real world, better, or at least stop it from getting worse. The same goes for malevolence. You can constrain that within yourself. When you are about to say something, your conscious might, often does, inform you, noting that is not true. It might present itself as an actual voice, internal, of course, or a feeling of shame, guilt, weakness, or other inner disunity. The psychological consequence of the duality of psyche you are manifesting, you then have the opportunity to cease uttering those words. If you cannot tell the truth, you can at least not consciously lie. That is part of the constraint of malevolence. That is something within our grasp. Beginning to cease knowingly lying is a major step in the right direction. We can constrain our suffering and we can face it psychologically. That makes us courageous. Then we can ameliorate it practically, because that is what we do when we care for ourselves. And other people. There seems to be almost no limit to that. You can genuinely and competently come to care for yourself and for your family you can then extend that out into the broader community. Some people become unbelievably good at that. People who work in palliative care constitute a prime example. They work continually caring for people who are suffering and dying, and they lose some of those people every day. But they manage to get out of bed every morning, go to work, and face all that pain, tragedy, and death. They make a difference under virtually impossible circumstances. It is for such reasons, and because of such examples, watching people confront the existential catastrophe of life forthrightly and effectively, that I am more optimistic than pessimistic, and that I believe that optimism is fundamentally more reliable than pessimism. To come to such conclusion, and then to find it unshakable, is a good example of how and why it may be necessary to encounter the dark before you can see the light. It is to be optimistic and naive. It is easy for optimism to be undermined and demolished. However, if it is naive and for cynicism to arise in its place, but the act of peering into the darkness as deeply as possible reveals the light that appears unquenchable and that is profound. That is a profound surprise, as well as a great relief. The same holds true for the issue of gratitude. I do not believe you can be appropriately grateful or thankful for what good you have and for what evil has not befallen you until you have some profound and even terrifying sense of the weight of existence. You cannot properly appreciate what you have unless you have some sense not only of how terrible things could be, but of how terrible it is likely for things to be, given how easy it is for things to be so. This is something that is very much worth knowing. Otherwise, you might find yourself tempted to ask, why would I ever look into the darkness? But we seem positively drawn to look. We are fascinated by evil. We watch dramatic representations of serial killers, psychopaths, and the kings of organized crime, gang members, rapists, contract killers, and spies. We voluntarily frighten and disgust ourselves with thrillers and horror films, and it is more than prurient curiosity. It is the development of some understanding of the essential moral structure of human existence, of our suspension between the poles of good and evil. The development of that understanding is necessary. It places a down below us and an up above us, and orients us in perception, motivation, and action. It protects us as well. If you fail to understand evil, then you have laid yourself bare to it. You are susceptible to its effects or to its will. If you ever encounter someone who is malevolent, they have control over you in precise proportion to the extent that you are unwilling or unable to understand them. Thus, you look in dark places to protect yourself, in case the darkness ever appears, as well as to find the light. There is real utility in that.